Some of the fear of wolves goes to the fact that wolves live in family groups, generally in packs. They protect their home, their territory, versus a house, and their family to the death, which we as humans do. We go to war over this. I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think that all revolves because we are similar to wolves. There's not many other carnivore species that are commonly around that exist that way, in the same sort of a social structure as humans.
Hi there, listeners. Man, have I got a treat for you today. So, look, one of my favorite quotes is by President Theodore Roosevelt. He established the first ever national wildlife refuge. And Teddy's quote is the following: "The wildlife in its habitat cannot speak, so we must and we will." I love it. Gives me goosebumps just saying it. I got to tell you, there is a special place in my heart for people who devote their lives to protecting our planet, including all of its creatures. Yes, including the wolf. The wolf. The 12th cousin, 86 times removed from our domesticated dogs that we love so much. And if there's one individual who is singularly responsible for having the greatest impact on the protection of this beautiful creature, it is my incredible guest today, Diane Boyd. What Dian Fossey has done for the gorilla and what Jane Goodall has done for the chimpanzee in terms of awareness and empathy and conservation, Diane has done for the wolf. Now, if you're anything like me, and man, I sincerely hope you're not, but if you are, you can't think of the wolf without conjuring up that Three Little Pigs cartoon with the famous lyric, and you know the one: "Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? The big bad wolf." Okay, you get it. I'll spare you the rest of the song with my wonderful tune here. And if that song gets stuck in a loop in your head, like it does for me, well, you're welcome. Anyway, the wolf is a far cry from that sinister villain we came to know from all those childhood fables. And I got to say, we owe a debt of gratitude to Diane and her life's work. And I hope you'll come to know her and this majestic creature by the time you're done listening. So, enough of me. Without further ado, here's my interview with wildlife biologist and wolf conservationist, Diane Boyd. Welcome to the Art of Excellence. In the words of Aristotle, excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. I am your host, Glenn Zweig. Join me now as I dive into the lives and careers of world-class entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, scientists, thought leaders, and explorers to uncover the ingredients to their extraordinary accomplishments. My guest today is Diane Boyd. Diane has 4 decades of experience on behavior, conservation, and management of wild wolf populations. In 1979, Diane moved to Montana to study wolf recovery in the Rocky Mountains. From the first natural colonizer to approximately his work for the University of Montana, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. She received her MS and Ph.D. from the University of Montana. Her new book is titled A Woman Among Wolves, My Journey Through 40 Years of Wolf Recovery. Diane, it is a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm really glad to be here.
Okay, so I was doing a little Googling just about an hour ago just to see, is there anything, if I do a Google search on wolf, anything that might pop up that's sort of current for us to talk about. And fortunately, but in this case, maybe also unfortunately, there was some news I saw, which is that the majority of European countries just accepted this proposal to downgrade the wolf status from strictly protected to protected. And I'm assuming that translates into a lot more freedom to hunt and kill wolves. So I wanted just to get your thoughts on that. I know your work is more focused in the U.S., but that didn't feel like good news to me.
So the downgrading would be of wolves in Europe would be equivalent to our downlisting of wolves here in the U.S. I'm not a legal person in Europe, nor am I a researcher there, but what I can tell you is they have more wolves in Europe than we have, and they have no way to address livestock management issues. So, and I don't know if that downgrading will include recreational hunting like we do here in the West. They can trap and shoot wolves for sport. I suspect in Europe it will be more for management practices because wolves over there are killing a lot of livestock because they don't, often many of the countries don't have as much wildlife as we have for a prey base.
Yeah, I don't know if legislation over there tends to spill across the ocean over to here, and I didn't know if that gave you any concerns about what's happening in the broader sense. Yeah.
The news is so new. I think we're just going to have to let it play out and see if they're really interested in having very liberal hunting seasons like we have here in Montana and Idaho and Wyoming, or if it's really just to address management concerns. And I'm not sure at this point what that is.
Yeah. So when I got the news that we were going to have this chance to talk together, I spent some time, I just closed my eyes and I tried to reach back in my memory banks of when was the seed first planted of the fear of wolves in me as a kid. What was it? And then it hit me. Any guesses before I tell you what the answer was?
Well, there always people mention the Little Red Riding Hood, but there was a cartoon when we were a kid in the Big Bad Wolf, the cartoon character.
Yeah, you just won the prize. It was the Big Bad Wolf in the Three Little Pigs fable. And there was a book before it was a cartoon, but those lyrics, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, they just started playing over and over and over in my head. And of all the wild carnivores in the world, which we're more than happy to devour these three little pigs, they chose the wolf. And as if that was a fluke, yes, there was also Little Red Riding Hood. There was also Peter and the Wolf, and on and on and on. And by the way, Little Red Riding Hood goes back to the 17th century. So it's not like this notion of the big bad wolf is a modern convention. So where I wanted to start here is, why do you suppose that the wolf has always been portrayed as the villain in these fairy tales?
I think they've been portrayed as a wolf for much longer than we've been writing words. I think it goes back to ancient relations of early hominids, early humans, and the wolves that were hunting on the landscape that people, had some fear of. And I think through that, it comes forward in history, be it just passed on genetically or oral history, and it translates into fears and fairy tales. And it's interesting to me because there are a lot of other carnivores out there that kill a lot more people, and people don't have that fear of them, like bears and cougars. And
yeah, you address the fear of wolves head on and how ridiculous it is. Yeah. And I think I read like maybe 24 documented attacks on people over the last century.
Yes.
Over the last century, and how extremely rare it is, in that you point out more people, if this is true, have died from cows, which, by the way, as a sidetrack, it got me sort of curious, like how does one actually die at the hand of a cow? But a separate topic for a separate podcast. But it's none of it's based on reality is the point. So, but it's based on something.
Like I said, I think it goes back to a more primitive time when we only had spears, and perhaps the big primitive wolf, what was a dire wolf or early progenitor of, perhaps it was due to dire wolves or early ancestors of modern wolves that they did indeed occasionally kill people. I think, in my book, A Woman Among Wolves, I explain the research I was doing, and the fears of wolves became more pronounced when people began domesticating livestock. And the wolves became a threat to one's survival when they kill your livestock.
When I was thinking about back to the fables, the wolf wasn't just portrayed as evil and vicious, but if you recall from those, it was also cunning and manipulative. So it got me wondering: are those traits in any way based even loosely on any sort of reality of a wolf's personality?
I think those are projections of ourselves as a human race.
Huh.
And I think some of the fear of wolves goes to the fact that wolves live in family groups, generally in packs.
Yeah.
They protect their home, their territory, versus a house, and their family to the death, which we as humans do. We go to war over this. I think there's a lot of parallels, and I think that all revolves because we are similar to wolves. There's not many other carnivore species that are commonly around that exist that way, in the same sort of a social structure as humans.
How about their intelligence?
They're very intelligent. I've spent my career trying to catch and radio collar them, and yeah, I don't think cunning has some value attached to it, but they're very intelligent. I have been outsmarted so many times by wolves. I'm always impressed with their ability to detect, and sometimes I think maybe even they're just playing a little joke on me. I mean, some of these individual wolves I've had long relations with trying to catch them. But yeah, they're the most intelligent animal out there. And if you talk to anybody who's a trapper, they're the hardest animal to catch.
Is there any way, I don't know if you still have two dogs, but I know you had two dogs for a long time
Yes.
with you in that cabin. Is there a way to compare and contrast with like the smartest dog breeds?
I've had a lot of dogs, and I'm a bird hunting person, and I have bird dogs. I spent a lot of time training. I just came back from a trip 2 days ago. They're pretty darn smart. They've got really well-honed instincts. We just work them to fit our needs. However, in comparison to a wolf, there's no comparison. Wolves are ultimately intelligent. I would say a dog is I hate to say this, but kind of a dumbed down version of wolves. That we have selectively bred our dogs out of wild wolf stock to be calm, compliant, and to work with us. And I think perhaps that involves sometimes less intelligence, although there are breeds like border collies and Malinois that are incredibly bright. I think my bird dogs are real smart, but it's nothing like a wolf.
Interesting. Just to maybe rewind the clock on you a little bit. You mentioned that you inherited your curiosity about nature from your dad.
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, he was born and raised on a farm in Iowa, and he was as a child he could run free. My dad was born in 1909. It's a long time ago, and there were still prairie chickens, and there was a lot of wildlife, and he hunted. And as an adult, he continued bird hunting. Never, to the best of my knowledge, ever killed a big game animal. But he liked to go camping. My mom was a city gal, and she put up with it. We had family camping trips. We went to the cabin. But he was always showing me things with different animals in the woods, or fish, or a salamander, or whatever, something like that. And of all of me and my two siblings, I'm the only one that really likes to be involved with nature and the outdoors a lot. And they appreciate the beauty, but they are not biologists, don't have a lot of curiosity about the things that go on, I would say. Their skills are in other areas that I don't have, like psychology and managing finances.
Were you pretty independent minded in school?
Yes, I've always been quite independent minded, and moved out of home when I was 18 and been on my own.
Yeah. Any guesses what was behind that?
I don't know what makes us humans all different.
Yeah. It's interesting how do we choose our path or does the path choose us?
Yeah.
You were, I think, 16 when you got your first dog.
Yeah, I was. And I'd wanted a dog all my life and was denied having a dog. And so this dog was very special to me.
You had a pretty terrifying experience when you took the dog to the zoo.
Yes. So the dog's name was Duffy. He was small. He was a mutt between a Sheltie and a poodle. So I guess it could be a Sheltie poo in modern terms. We do all these doodle things. Anyway, he was 25 pounds and I took him to the Como Park Zoo in St. Paul, where they had just built a new wolf. It was called the Wolf Woods, and it was very novel in 1974. It was a 5 acre enclosure with all natural habitat, and often you didn't even see the wolves. But anyway, I took him there, and it only had a single chain link fence around it. It wasn't double, and that wasn't very not much forethought on their part in building it that way. But anyway, I went up to the fence. I had the dog on a leash, and the wolves came running out of nowhere and put their faces right up to the fence, and little Duffy was looking at them, and because he's a male dog, he decides he's going to pee on the fence, and he raises his little leg up to the fence chain with all those wolf faces there. And the chain link square was just a little bit bigger than the size of his little tiny hind foot, and his foot managed to just sit there in one of those squares, and one of those wolves shot his nose through that chain link square and grabbed his foot and got a hold of it and yanked it in through the fence up to as far as he could pull it in, and the wolves were tearing his leg off. It was terrible and stupid on my part, and no doubt the most exciting day those wolves have had in their life in captivity.
Yeah. And granted, it was a rookie mistake on your part, but
Yes.
still, what's surprising to me is I would think your little Duffy. I mean, your Duffy could have easily died
Oh yeah.
at the hands of this wolf, and that didn't scar you. That didn't make you, even though you know that you shouldn't have put your dog in that situation. I would think that would just have some sort of visceral reaction to wolves and make you want to maybe stay away. No.
It really wasn't the wolves' fault. I mean, it was my fault, my poor judgment. And I rushed him to the near vets, and they saved him and saved his leg, and he went on to live on mark again on other chain link fences, just not wolves. So no, it didn't turn me off to wolves.
Yeah, there must be some kind of, I mean, that's empathy. You're right. It wasn't their fault per se, but a lot of people in that situation would not be a huge fan of an animal which almost took out their own pet, even if they put the pet in harm's way, you know?
I understand that. And I would say that Duffy's pain and suffering for a few months saved some other child, because any child could have gone up and put their hand through the fence. The same thing. Just a small, the child could get their hand in. And soon after my dog event, I later went by again, and then there was a double layer of chain link fence.
Oh, so you know what? Duffy's a hero.
Duffy saved some child from having their arm ripped off, possibly.
Wow.
Because I mean, for wolves, it's just entertainment. They're not vicious. It's like dangling a swinging bird in front of a cat,
Yeah.
live flapping around. It's just like, wow, look at that. Anyway, no, they double chain linked the fence.
Yeah. Well, good for Duffy.
Good for Duffy,
Didn't
yeah.
go in vain. So, Dan, what drew you to studying wolves in particular? Not coyotes, not foxes, not mountain lions, not grizzlies. What was it about the wolf?
Well, I grew up in Minnesota, and at the time, Minnesota was the only state with wolves in it. There was a handful in Isle Royale and a couple in Michigan here and there, but Minnesota had about 1,000. And I used to go up and camp up in northern Minnesota, up in the Boundary Water Canoe area. And my goal and hope was to hear wolves howl. That rarely happened. I didn't go up there that often, but once in a while I'd see a track, and they're just this mysterious embodiment of the wild in my mind. I love wild places, and they are wilderness personified. I guess that was a big part of it. And not having dogs when I was young, I really became really attracted to this super smart, large, incredible carnivore.
Is restoration of a species like a wolf, do you feel that's a moral obligation?
That's a really good question. I can answer as a person and I can answer as a professional
Okay.
scientist, but as a person, I guess the answers are quite similar. I mean, they're a missing piece from the ecosystem, and restoring them, be it through natural recovery through dispersal, like I documented, or be it through reintroductions.
Mhm.
The absence of them has changed ecosystems, and the return of them does begin to more normalize how things were. However, we have touched every ecosystem and every part and removed so many pieces of it. The bison and black-footed ferrets and all that will never be free again on the prairie, or in limited quantities. And that's had a huge impact. We've plowed and torn up and replaced native prairie with agriculture. So I think having wolves back on the landscape is definitely a step in the right direction, but
Mhm.
we have to have ways to manage it, because there will always be conflicts with any kind of a carnivore on the landscape where humans are, and humans are everywhere.
Well, you started your career. You lived all alone, or I should say, all alone with two dogs in an old turn of the century log cabin, and sort of as best I could picture it, like in the middle of nowhere, if you will. So it's just you and the dogs in the wilderness, right? And these elusive wolves. I heard one of your lectures. You said that when you started out your career, you were this misanthropic wolf researcher. And so you used that word, which I found very interesting. So were you seeking that kind of isolation? It just seems like something where you would get really lonely being sort of all there by yourself.
I've always enjoyed my solitude. I've always been independent. I used to be a bit misanthropic, as you say, because I didn't really care to associate with humans a lot, when the beauty of in my life was the wild places and wild things. But however, I wasn't always alone. There were periods where I was alone, but there was many periods where I had volunteers and co-workers living in other little old rustic turn of the century cabins too. But I had a lot of alone time, and I don't get lonely. There's a big difference between being alone and being lonely, and I found my life very fulfilling, researching and studying these animals, following them around, and getting the word out in
Hmm.
good science, what they really were, and more importantly, what they were not. That was really fulfilling. And I really changed as I matured in my career and in my personal life. I came to realize that if I really want to help wolf conservation, I have to work with people. It's really
Hmm.
not wolf management, it's people management. And it was very important that I have good social skills
Hmm.
and learn to listen and learn to respond with appropriate language and appropriate information.
Well, speaking of working with people, I think wildlife conservation traditionally has been a pretty male dominated field. And I know there were exceptions to the norm, Diane Fossey, of course, and Jane Goodall.
Mhm.
I always forget the name, and I shouldn't, but the woman who was studying orangutans,
Yes.
that was part of that same class.
Mhm.
But, few and far between. Was curious, was that part of the appeal for you to be a trailblazer in that sense?
I did not approach my career with the idea of being a trailblazer. I just wanted to study wolves, and it took me from northern Minnesota, where I began, to this wonderful opportunity in the Rocky Mountains. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, you wake up in the morning and there's the peaks of Glacier National Park, and there's elk in the meadow, and it had nothing to do with being female. I wanted to do that, and I always have sought and enjoyed challenges. I in my recreational life and my
Mm-hmm.
professional life, I play hard and I work hard. And so people began asking me that question starting in the 90s. Wow, what was it like being an early pioneer woman in this male
Mm-hmm.
dominated field? And I really kind of hadn't really thought much about it. I pull on my pants one leg at a time, like everybody else, regardless of gender. And I did indeed experience what nowadays would be, I guess, sexual harassment and whatever. But I didn't belong. I mean, I'm not part of the Me Too movement. I just do my work. And when I have obstacles that come up, I work harder. I don't complain. I am not a whiner. I don't go to other people with my problems. I seek a solution and I resolve things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does seem like you had to do more to prove yourself. You,
I
you were
did.
not
And
given the benefit of the doubt. That must have been frustrating at times.
it was frustrating. And I think that the thing you just mentioned about having to prove myself,
Hmm.
I think that happened from a very young age on. And I think that is at the core of my personality.
Say more.
I wanted to match wits with the smartest carnivore out there. I wanted to live in an extreme climate under rustic conditions because that was what was required to study these animals in their element. I was very athletic. It's, skied hundreds, thousands of miles on wolf tracks and loved all of it. I put myself through school, college. I never took out a loan. I worked really low paying jobs because I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to prove myself. I eventually went and got a Ph.D. because I wanted to prove to myself I could do it. I ran a marathon at age 50 because I wanted to prove I could do it. It's just part of who I am, I guess. I had never really thought about it till you asked.
Going back to Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey, were they? I'm trying to think about when you started your career. Did that? I assume that paralleled a lot of their careers as well. Did you know them?
Oh, definitely. And Jane Goodall was my idol from the time I was little. Diane Fossey was also there, but she wasn't as her light didn't shine as brightly, and she was killed for her conservation
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, it definitely was there. And I checked with Dave Meach, who is the preeminent wolf biologist in the world, and he's a very dear friend and still working, and he's in his mid 80s. It's my dogs. Sorry. I checked with him and I said, was I the first woman at that time? Was I the only woman working in the field and catching and collaring wolves? And he thought for a while. He says, yes. But I didn't know it at the time. I thought there were others. I mean, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have telephone. We didn't have, all that stuff. So, yeah. Again, that wasn't a motive for me to be the first woman doing this. It just happened to work out that way.
Well, the wolf came really close, it seems, to becoming extinct,
Yeah.
and was saved in large part, it seems, from the Endangered Species Act of 1974. So I assume that must have been an inflection point in the wolf's recovery. Were there any others after that point?
I'm not sure where you're going. Explain that
Well,
again.
meaning that if it weren't for that particular legislation, you might not have had a career studying wolves.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that the inflection point was really a little earlier, like when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring.
Okay.
That was in the 60s, and there was a trend towards more awareness of the environment instead of having to battle elements to embrace them. I mean, that kind of was a definite change in our culture in this country. And it was first Earth Day, and it kind of all wrapped up in the Endangered Species Act, of course. And, the Endangered Species Act was created through Congress eventually, and it can go away again. And that has me a little concerned.
Well, I think if I have the story right here, somewhere in the 70s, and I assume it was around that time, there was one single wolf that was known to exist in the western U.S.
Yeah.
Like you said, most of the population was elsewhere. Today, there are like 2,000 in that part of the country, which is just astonishing to me.
Yes.
So what? And I know that one wolf found a mate, and they had offspring, which of course multiplied. So what percent of those 2,000 were from that original wolf and their mate, and what percent was from some of the reintroduction that humans have done?
I can't give a precise answer because you can't determine
There's no way
that.
to know. Okay, I didn't know if there were if there are ways in terms of if we did that blood sampling and things like that.
Well, there's been because it's a continuous flow down from Canada. There's no termination. So while we're sorting through the wolves that were reintroduced, the 66 originally to Yellowstone and Idaho, and we had our 75 or so in Montana, 8 packs before they began the reintroductions in 1995. If it was just those animals, we could answer that question. But while this is all going on, there's a continual influx of wolves in from British Columbia and Alberta muddying the water, so to
Mm.
speak. And you can't sort it out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, we could look at genetically those early wolves from Glacier Park, but the next bunch that are coming down are not captured or recorded, so we don't have DNA from them. That's why it's difficult to answer that.
Okay. Well, let me ask you something, and please correct me if I'm misconstruing, but it seemed that I don't know if the right word is that you were against reintroduction, but that you felt like maybe it wasn't needed, that the wolf, if you just leave them alone and don't hunt them down, they're very good at repopulating themselves, if I'm using the right terminology here. Is there something to that? Was that a net positive or neutral or negative to you, all the human intervention here?
That's a great question. So what I would say was I and my colleagues on the Wolf Ecology Project
Hmm.
monitored and recorded the return of wolves under their own dispersal power from Canada.
Hmm.
We're linked to Canada. There's not a barrier. They made it on their own with no fanfare and no money and no secretaries of the interior carrying in the steel crates and all that. When the reintroductions happened, just just before, like 2, 3 years before, there had been two wolves documented in the Yellowstone area that had gotten there that nobody put there. So they were trickling down. We had wolves in Idaho. We had wolves dispersed from Montana into central Idaho with radio collars. They were banking it on their own. And my philosophy, I have scientists who agree and scientists who disagree with me, but my philosophy is they would definitely get there on their own. It might take a decade, it might take 30 years, but they would get there just like they did in Montana because of the habitat continuity down the Rocky Mountains.
Hmm.
It's pretty isolated. So I feel strongly they would have gotten there on their own. And so to say I was against the reintroductions is accurate in concept. The reason was because I feel and believe strongly that acts of politics in Congress that are forced on people in shoving wolves onto landscapes that maybe not everybody's happy to have them creates long-term animosity. Whereas if the wolves walk down there on their own, they're more tolerated and socially accepted, and those that cause problems are shot and disappear.
Hmm.
So that's my basis for being opposed to reintroductions, not the fact they were introducing them. But I firmly believe that for the long-term good and survival of wolves and tolerance on the landscape by humans, getting on their own is a more powerful tool. It just simply takes longer.
Well, the wolf wasn't the only creature that was threatened, that the Endangered Species Act was trying to protect. There was the grizzly bear. I think, if I recall, there was the Florida panther. There was the bald eagle. On and on and on. Any sense how the wolf recovery compared to all those others?
Oh gosh. Well, when I came here in 1979, we had one wolf west of the Mississippi. And now we have, actually, it's about 3,000 in the West because they're now in Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, California. Wolves occasionally get to Nevada and Utah where they're instantly shot. But there's a lot of wolves. And those wolves are descendants of the reintroduced wolves as well as the native wolves. But all the wolves got there through dispersal. Wolves walked on their own to Washington, Oregon, California. So I cannot think of a more successful story than wolves in terms of wolf species recovering, fully recovered. There's thousands of them now. There's, 5,000 or so in the Midwest. There's 3,000 here in the West. We got the Mexican wolves. And then there's connected to a population in Canada. So they've exceeded all expectations
Yeah.
of recovery. And I mean, bald eagles have done well, peregrine falcons have done well. They've been delisted, but the numbers of masses, wolves are generalists and they can survive anywhere if we'll tolerate them.
Yeah. Maybe some of the other species required more human intervention, and maybe the
Yes.
wolf could have done more. You mentioned the range of these wolves. Like one of them, I think you said, was found to have journeyed 500 or 600 miles or something.
Yeah.
Is that typical or atypical even for a wolf?
When we documented that wolf dispersal 540 miles north, it was very novel because we only had the old-fashioned VHF collars, which You have to physically go out in the landscape with a radio receiver or in an airplane to find them. And nowadays, we have GPS collars, which work off satellite. So you're always getting locations. And since the advent of GPS collars, we're finding, oh my God, they go 1,000 miles. It's not a big deal anymore. And that's why I really believe wolves are the ultimate in a species recovery, because they can disperse far, they can disperse fast. They're habitat generalists. It's not like a lynx, which is dependent on snowshoe hare and a dense, dark forest. Wolves will live anywhere we put up with them.
You mentioned a few close encounters you've had, and you obviously you got to get up close to these wolves. You got to sedate them. You got to do the work you're doing. And what was the scariest one?
I had a wolf pup one time. I had a wolf pup one time that I caught at 5 months of age, and I thought, well, this would be easy. She's about 55 pounds. I'll just walk right up to her and poke her in the rump with my drugs on the end of a 3-foot stick. And the way that it was set up was there was a drag hook, and she had 8 feet of chain. So as I approached her, she went to as far away as she could get. So she's 8 feet that way from the anchor point. And I walked right up to her. And about the time I was going to poke her, she turned and whirled and faced me and then ran at me. So I had to run backwards that 8 feet with the drugs in my hand and run back another 8 feet to reach the end of the anchor point. And when I got there, I tripped. And she came up short on the chain. And it wasn't really scary. That's the only time I've ever had a wolf ever turn toward me and try to come at me. And I thought to myself, my gosh, you are going to be an alpha someday. And 2 years later, she was a breeding female of a pack. She was a dominant animal. She lived on the landscape a long time and contributed many pups. She had attitude from that young age. But other than that, I've never had wolves come at me in a trap. I've had bears come at me in a trap. I had a mountain lion try and get me in a trap. But wolves, no.
Well, speaking of which, help me understand, how does one create a trap that, and I know it wasn't 100% only capturing wolves, but you got better and better at it to ensure that you weren't capturing grizzlies or mountain lions or other creatures. What is it that you're doing that is particular to a wolf, but somehow evading the other species out there?
So when I first started trapping wolves in Minnesota, it was 1977, and I didn't know anything. I was born and raised in the Twin Cities, and I had to learn a lot. And then I moved to Montana in 79 and carried on the trapping. And so it was a pretty steep learning curve for me, because here in the Rocky Mountains, we have wolves, grizzly bears, black bears, mountain lions, bobcats, lynx, wolverine. It goes on, and I had to learn through trial and error how to select more for just wolves. So I end up fine-tuning my technique by learning where the wolves were traveling through skiing on their tracks in the winter, and I could figure out their travel routes and corridors. So I had a more generalized idea. They don't have certain highway maps, but you have a generalized idea. And then I learned how to set my lures or baits minuscule amounts that most predators would walk by, wouldn't probably notice, and things that would be only attractive to wolves. And I began eliminating the non-target catches. But I don't give away a lot of secrets, because I don't want people out there using my information.
Okay. I was gonna start asking, what is it? The wolf? That's so interesting.
I won't do that, because the people here are trapping wolves, and I got pretty good at it. But
yeah, you got really good at it. You were doing this work for decades, like over 4 decades. Were there any periods where you just felt like throwing in the towel? Moments where it didn't feel like you were making the progress you wanted to, and maybe that the cause was greater than your ability to personally impact?
I had a lot of challenging times, and it would sometimes be weeks between catching wolves, or I would lose one and I would search in an airplane for months for it. But I never doubted that I would succeed eventually. No, I didn't. No, didn't want to give up and throw in the towel.
Yeah, and what would keep you going?
Chocolate. I'm a very curious person, and if I was perceiving myself as failing at something,
Hmm.
I would restructure what I was doing and try a different way of doing it. So it was like always problem solving and working new angles and seeking solutions. When you're failing, you do something different. That was kind of fun for me, actually.
And it would just never, you'd never get discouraged.
Oh, I'd get discouraged, but you asked if I felt like I was ready to throw in the towel. No.
You took it as a challenge to just innovate and
Right.
come up with a different way of accomplishing what you want to
Right.
accomplish.
And it's, I mean, we're talking a lot about my wolf trapping, but I did a lot of other things in my career for wolves. And some of these challenges were figuring out how to work with humans who hate wolves. And so it would be the same technique. Was I discouraged? Yes. Was I told to get the hell off of a ranch? Yes. Did I give up? No.
Yeah.
I would find a way to find a common ground. And sometimes the only common ground we might have would be the rancher or farmer did not want his cattle killed by wolves. And I didn't want the wolves killing his cattle. And other than that, we had no common ground. But we had that to agree on. And from that basis, we could begin starting to build a relationship of trust and working towards a solution.
Was there a particular moment, I guess on the flip side, when you felt like all this hard work, all the years of sacrifice and dedication was finally making a difference?
Yeah, when wolves began showing up and dispersing to all these different places, and when wolves became such a hit in Yellowstone, I always envy the people who have the privilege of working in Yellowstone on wolves because they can go see them. I go to Yellowstone at least twice a year and go watch wolves. It's wonderful. Even if I'm not in favor of the reintroduction per se, but I enjoy them because you'll never get that up where I worked on wolves. I live in a dense lodgepole fir spruce forest, and the only time you saw them, if you got lucky, you might see them from an airplane looking down while you're circling at treetop. That was it. You're never going to have a tourist business built on wolves in northern Montana.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I went to Yellowstone
Oh, good.
last summer, and I think I was looking forward to seeing the wolf more than anything else on that trip. And we came out empty. We went to all the
Oh,
places they said they go to.
oh,
We got there the crack of dawn. I saw name any other animal that exists, and we saw it in droves. And no wolf, no wolf. It
I'm
was
so.
probably like right there, and it was just maybe camouflaged or something. I don't know, but it didn't.
How long did you stay? A couple days
In Yellowstone.
to look for wolves?
Yeah. I mean, like we would go to what's that valley, like Lamar Valley, for
Lamar.
example. We were there for, I don't know, 3, 4
Right.
hours, just trying to, where we'd see people looking like, oh, maybe they've got the spotting, and we'd go
Right.
congregate there, and another bison, for a dollar for every bison. No offense to the bison, of course. Was wondering how. I know you do all this work where you're collaring the wolves and observing from afar, if you will. But I think about back to, again, like Diane Fossey and Jane Goodall, can sit there up close and personal for hours and hours a day, just observing and taking notes of these animals and how they interact and everything. How are you able to study behavior of these animals when they're so elusive? Even you catch them, but then they're off, and so everything you get, I assume, is going to be just through data that you're looking at that's being tracked. Would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we in the winter time, myself and my volunteers and technicians would radio track every day and learn where the wolves were from outside on the road, driving along, listening with the antenna and receiver, and then we would ski into where they had been the day before, and we would start skiing backwards on their tracks. And then each day the wolves would move, so you could then ski where they had been on the day you found their signals. And I tell you what, you learn a lot by literally walking in a wolf's shoes for miles on skis. You learn the habitat they travel through. You learn how they respond to scent of a coyote or a wolf or a deer. You learn where they chose to sleep. You learn how they kill animals. You can see the entire ecology of wolves written in the snow by their tracks. It's fascinating, and you can stay on it for miles. And we collect a lot of data on kills, but again, that's only the snow season. So that's generally, Thanksgiving till March. We stopped tracking the wolves in March. So even though we had snow, we didn't want to interfere with their selection of a den site by harassing.
Yeah.
But in the summer months, we simply didn't know because if they got locations and they were resting in one spot that wasn't the den for 2, 3 days, you know there was a kill, but you couldn't go in because it'd probably have a grizzly bear on it. So summertime was kind of blank.
Hey, by the way, coyote, is that, do you pronounce it coyote?
I say coyote, but people say coyote.
Yeah, tomato. Okay. Is the wolf, is that like a cousin? It's got to be somehow related to a wolf.
Coyotes and wolves split a long, long time ago.
Okay. Are they, so today they're dramatically different in terms of temperament and behavior and these kinds of things?
Yeah, they have been for a long time. I'm trying to think of a date so I can throw that out there, but hundreds of thousands or millions of years. It's a long.
Oh, okay. Wow. Are they social creatures the way wolves are? You mentioned that wolves are unique in that sense.
Coyotes, they live in pairs and they have pups of the year, and generally when they're a year old, those pups move on. So they don't live in big extended families that continue working as a family unit for a long time because they eat small prey. So a coyote doesn't need a pack to pull down a deer fawn or catch a snowshoe hare or whatever. It's a different ecology, whereas wolves are almost always catching prey that's much bigger than they are, and it requires a cooperative effort with pack members.
Interesting. I was thinking like the way orcas hunt in packs, the wolves that they have to hunt in packs. And is that the reason why these creatures tend to congregate together, why they're in packs to begin with? Or is there something beyond just the hunting requirement?
It's really interesting if you think of carnivore species, just generally, many carnivore species are more or less loners. There are some, but new camera techniques are finding that cougars, for example, which I think of as loners, are often associated with other cougars temporarily, but they don't live in packs. A female will have her kittens with her. Males are solitary. But a cougar is such an efficient killing machine. She's got sabers on 4 paws plus the teeth that they can jump on a prey animal and bring it down by themselves. So they're not like a wolf. A wolf is what we call a cooperative obligatory hunter. It's obliged to cooperate because it needs the power of many mouths to pull down a prey animal. I'm trying to think. Coyotes, they often take prey smaller than themselves and sometimes take prey bigger than themselves. I mean, coyotes can be pretty effective predators on different deer family members, but they don't make their living killing elk. It's not like wolves.
Huh. I think the wolf, you mentioned the average lifespan is like 4 years in the wild.
It's about 4.3 years in the wild.
Yeah. It feels like a really short lifespan.
It is a short lifespan because they have many dangers. The most obvious thing is just think if every time you wanted to have a meal, you had to run it down and catch it with your mouth. And it's got flailing hooves and antlers. Wolves get damaged and injured and killed by their prey animals sometimes. So there's danger involved in just trying to eat. And they have to eat often. And then, of course, they encounter other wolves, which are territorial. They encounter other predators. They encounter humans. They have disease. They have accidents. They get kicked. They get hit by cars. They have a huge variety of things that keeps their lifespan quite short. In captivity, zoo wolves and stuff can live to be 14, occasionally 15, where all their needs are met. They don't have to hunt. They have veterinary care. But that's not true in the wild.
So the number is independent of human intervention. In other words, it's not hunting that's shortening their lifespan. That's just from natural injuries or larger predators or that kind of thing.
Oh, some of it is definitely due to human causes. And so they did this analysis of the lifespan of wolves inside national parks like Yellowstone, and I'm trying to think of the other park, maybe it was Denali, and then outside of parks in the West in Minnesota. And it was basically the same. The wolf populations are self-regulating. So if there aren't humans, or I shouldn't put it that way. If humans are killing wolves, the wolf population is at a lower density and there's probably less strife between packs. For example, the largest cause of death in Yellowstone Park, where they're not legally taken by humans, is wolves killing other wolves, protecting their territory and their turf, just like we defend our home against intruders. And outside of the parks, the largest cause of mortality almost everywhere in North America well, in the United States anyway, is human caused.
So four or four and change, 4.3, if that's the average, what's the outer limits? What's the longest that we've observed a wolf living out in the wild?
Well, in the studies I'm aware of, 11 and 12,
Oh,
that would,
wow.
but those are exceptional. That's
Yeah,
like the 115-year-old human being.
right.
Extremely rare.
But the average you said in captivity is closer to that mark.
They could live in captivity. They could live in captivity, be like 14
Wow.
or 15, but that's probably not standard either. But they can, and they do, in a protected facility in life.
So back to where I started the interview, talk about what's happening over in Europe, and now take it over here to the US. My sense is, and I hope I'm wrong here, but it feels like we're starting to walk back a lot of many years and decades of conservation work that you and your colleagues have done by starting to allow more and more of these wolves to be shot and killed in increasing numbers. Are we inching back to where we started decades ago, or is that an overreaction? I hope it is.
That would depend on your perspective, I would say. I mean, about between 250, closer to 300 wolves are killed by people every year through recreational sport, trapping and hunting. There's more wolves that are killed for depredating livestock. There's more wolves that are poached and poisoned. There's more wolves that die from other causes. But on average, about 300 wolves a year are killed and known and recorded by humans. That's a lot of wolves. And the population is basically maintaining or slightly declining with that enormous pressure. It's about a third of the population, I would guess, at this point. Is it limiting the population? No. Do I like to see piles of dead wolves on tailgates? No. Is it destroying the wolf population? No. Is it causing great hardship to a social animal whose social structure gets of the pack gets very disturbed when the breeding pair, one or both of them, gets killed? Yes. Do packs split up because their breeding female gets killed? Yes. Do packs have lower survival rate when many of the elder wolves, the wise ones, die? Yes. So I guess you're looking at it from a moralistic standpoint. We can look at it from a scientific standpoint. And we did succeed in eradicating wolves from 95% of their habitat pretty quickly. It can be done again. Is that what's happening right now? No. They continue to spread. We keep getting more wolves. It's kind of a judgment call. I would like to see more outreach and proactive spread of educational materials to the public instead of just how to kill more wolves.
Yeah.
So I mean, I sense from what you're saying, you're opposed to the recreational killing of wolves.
I honestly tend to turn to experts like you in terms of what
Okay.
is a sustainable reality that we should live with. I don't know. I just got a sense that it felt like we're regressing.
We are regressing, and if you look at the laws that have been passed in Montana and Idaho in the last 3, 4 years by our conservative legislatures, the laws are appalling. They're absolutely appalling. And I mean, in places in Idaho and Montana, you can shoot wolves 24/7. You can shoot them at night with spotting scopes and spotlights and electronic calls. You can, in Idaho, you can go into dens and dig out puppies and kill them. It's pretty appalling, and it's legislature, it's law, and there's nothing else like it on the books for any other species in Montana or Idaho. And so I do see that as regressing back to the days of extirpation. But the wolves are very resilient and clever, and so far they're maintaining a wild, viable population. And I guess I would remind you and listeners that the Endangered Species Act, the recovery level for Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming combined for to determine could be delisted was 30 breeding pairs, which is say 300 wolves, a little less. And at that point, they were considered restored. And now we've got 3,000 wolves in the West. So I'm not saying I'm in favor of all this massive killing of wolves. I'm just looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah. Let me ask you maybe a little bit of a personal question. You've got obviously a biological connection with the wolf, a scientific connection, ecological connection. Do you feel an emotional connection with the wolf?
That is a line that I've walked my whole career, is to remain an objective scientist about an animal that I'm obviously passionate about. That has been one of my challenges, and I think I've succeeded because I believe that there are groups out there that are just out there for advocacy, whether they hate or love something. They're advocates. They have a definite role to play. My role, if I want to be an objective scientist and do the most for conservation, my role is to collect data, science, analyze it, and get it out there in a format that people can read and understand. A lot of early career was scientific publications. Now I'm doing more literature like my A Woman Among Wolves. I give the science to people and let them decide what they want to do in a format they can enjoy. I'm not going to say I love wolves, but I find them to be an extremely amazing and magnificent and fascinating animal. But I try to stay over the line of when during my professional career and not crossing that road into sign waving and petition signing and advocacy too far, because I feel the science will stand for itself in conservation.
So you mentioned some instances where you were tracking a wolf and you're studying the wolf. You know all these wolf names by its number, like a 5 digit number, which I thought was really, really interesting. And then all of a sudden you lost the signal, and it ends up that they were killed. A rancher, farmer, whatever. Yeah. And of course, there's the I'm sure frustration and disappointment that, gosh, this was a scientific experiment, and you need that information. But when you would see this wolf, I mean, you would actually see, there they are, and here's your collar back, and here's this dead wolf now. Would you ever just have an emotional reaction? Would you ever cry just seeing one of these wolves, perish like that?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. And that happens a lot, and I feel badly, and especially early on when we had very few wolves, and now, I mean, hundreds, are being shot every year. Those early wolves were a little more special because there were so few of them. And when I talked to the hunters, or ranchers, sushi hunters that were shooting the wolves, I felt my job was to give them information, and I would I would print out, because in the old days we didn't have internet, I would print out the information about that wolf, when I caught her, when I put the collar on, where she lived, how many pups she bore, if it was a male, where did he disperse to, did he start a pack, and the guys almost always became really interested in their trophy than as an individual. And I tried to do it that way, and also it was important for me to get information back. If somebody shot a wolf and it had gone 300 miles away and showed up dead, I want the information. And if I go off on the rails and I'm screaming and waving and being angry, nobody's going to tell me. But I mean, you can tell by reading my book and talking with me. I mean, I obviously am very, very passionate about wolves as a species and individuals, and I quote Stephen Jay Gould in there, and he made the most amazing quote. I don't have it in front of me, but to badly paraphrase it, it's just that we won't strive to save the things we do not love. There's like a whole paragraph, but that was kind of the bottom line. So, yeah, if you don't care about it, no one's going to want to protect it.
Is there anything about the wolf that we didn't discuss that you think would surprise people?
I think the most important thing about wolves is there's so many myths, and what is that old phrase, like if you repeat an untruth 8 times, it becomes a fact, or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's so much misinformation out there. What drives me a little crazy is when people say, oh, the wolves have killed all the deer and elk. I used to hunt over in this district. I've been hunting there for 38 years, and
Yeah.
I used to go there and get an elk every time I go there, and I don't see elk anymore, and I see wolf tracks everywhere. And it's like, huh, I'll think about that. I said, do you remember what your habitat looked like when you first started hunting there? It was like, well, yeah, I was, 15 years after a clear cut or a burn. And
Mm.
what's it look like now? Well, it's all these big trees. It's like, yeah, the habitat is no longer what the elk need, and they've moved. I mean, the fact is in Montana and Wyoming, I don't know about Idaho, but they got elk coming out of their ears. There's more elk in the state, and most units are over objective. They're giving away extra elk tags. They're trying to increase the harvest on elks. These are places where wolves are living. So elk, and like any other animal, they got to go where they feel safe and where they can reproduce and where they have food. And nowadays, a lot of that is on large private ranches that don't allow hunting. So a lot of this perception about animals not being where they used to be is because animals have moved on, and it's an access issue more than a population issue. So I would like more information to get out there about wolves, what wolves do not do, what they do not. If they were to decimate all the animals they were eating, they would all die. And I point to the fact it's like, the Lewis and Clark journals record, oh my God, the amazing amount of wildlife, the Serengeti of the West, and there was
Yeah.
wolves and grizzlies, and there was animals everywhere. And I point out, like, and who was controlling and managing the wolves back then?
Yeah.
It, it's
We need to hire a really creative writer and rewrite the Three Little Pigs, rewrite Little Red Riding Hood, right? Peter and the Wolf, all of these, and we'll whatever. Let's throw some other carnivore. Let them have their day in the sun.
And so one of the things that for some of the fish and game agencies that is managed by the state, there's not a lot of information out there about the research, or I guess there's a lack of research done on wolf predator prey dynamics. And as a state agency that manages, especially for prey animals, because humans like to hunt, I would think it would behoove them to get the public interested and excited about getting the information and supporting more research and getting the word out. There has been some done, and it maybe goes in a little magazine article somewhere, and then you never see it again. And people are still saying, the wolves have killed all the deer and elk. And it's like, that's absolutely not true.
Yeah. Despite the falsehoods, and despite maybe sometimes a step forward, a couple steps back, I hope you're able to look at your life's work and be really proud, because I think it's quite an accomplishment.
Well, thanks, Glenn. I mean, the fact is, I'm a Minnesotan, Lutheran from Minnesota, so we're never good enough, and we're always by average, right? Kind of humble.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's interesting because throughout my career, and I've done many things while I follow this wolf thread through my career, but I've also had other small jobs, short jobs. I worked pretty hard in my lifetime to get this information out. And I feel that I have this gift of having written a book that people are really grabbing onto. It's become very popular. I did not intend that. I felt I had a unique story to write. Nobody's ever written about the natural recovery of wolves down here, from the first wolf to 2023 and all the challenges that have come with this long range perspective of wolf recovery in the West. Nobody's done that. There's hundreds of books about Yellowstone wolves, but it's this continuity and the personal angle and weaving the stories and adventure and weaving science through that with not too technical. Anybody can pick this book up. And I feel like, well, despite all my career in doing wolves, maybe this book will have more impact. Maybe it will be my legacy and not actually the years I was working.
yeah.
For in terms of opening minds and allowing more wolf conservation to happen.
I hope it does. I mean, I certainly was ignorant. I mean, I learned a lot, not just about the repopulation, but just about wolves in general. I honestly hadn't. I mean, I never had any negative sentiment toward a wolf. Other than, I've gotten over my childhood nightmares. I like all wild creatures, but I learned a ton about it. That certainly opened my mind in my eyes.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And I don't shove science down people's throat. It's told through stories.
It didn't feel preachy at all. Not at all.
No. That was my goal, was to tell a story not preach, and let people make up their own minds, and that anybody could pick it up and read it. That was my goal,
Yeah.
and get something from it.
Well, I don't know if you listen to any of my other podcasts, but I end all of them with this question, which is the podcast, of course, is called The Art of Excellence.
Yes.
And I love my guests to define what that word excellence means to them.
Wow. Excellence would be something that I would want to aspire to. Excellence means that it's a highest standard of quality of whatever it is that you're measuring or looking at, and that you are really good at what you do, and maybe you can help other people be good at it as well. It's mentoring. It's all part of that.
Yeah. Well, I have such an incredible admiration and respect for people that are so mission driven in their lives and in their careers. And this wasn't like a chapter for a few years. I mean, this is your life's work. And I didn't even get into all that. I mean, you may not call them sacrifices, but that cabin was off the grid. I mean, there was no electricity. There was no plumbing. You made a lot of sacrifices to accomplish something that, clearly is really meaningful to you. And I hope that, the output from that will carry on for years and years to come, for decades to come.
Well, thank you. And the thing with the cabin and the lifestyle, all that, and you said you made a lot of sacrifices. I didn't think of it as a sacrifice.
Exactly. But it
just
was.
didn't.
Well, that's what makes you you. Right?
I laugh because that old cabin, I always thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world. That cabin was old and there was cracks this big in it, and I had weasels and pack rats running through my bedroom, and I was enthralled. I loved the whole thing I loved everything.
Yeah. So thank you for what you've done. And thank you so much for, spending time with me and my audience here on your story.
Well, thank you, Glenn. And you've asked really good questions. You asked some that I've never been asked before. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And hopefully it'll encourage a few more people to read the book and think about what wolves are and what they are not, and how they fit into our human-dominated landscapes nowadays.
Fantastic. Diane, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, here's my ask of you. First, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Second, tell a friend. Better yet, share it with all your friends and contacts on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Honestly, wherever you hang out online is fine with me. Please leave me a review if you could on iTunes or Spotify or both. The reviews really do help. And finally, try to find one takeaway from this episode that you can apply to your own life. Commit to trying something, anything. As the saying goes, no harm in trying. I leave you with this one question. How do you define the word excellence?